The interstellar research transport vessel Horizon Drift eased into orbit around Linares 6, its massive engines humming down to a gentle purr as it settled into position. The planet below shimmered like a sapphire and emerald marble against the black velvet of space, its two moons casting twin silver reflections across the vast oceans that covered 60% of its surface. Lieutenant Jack Monroe stood at the observation deck, watching as the vessel's external cameras transmitted live feeds of the approaching landing party. His fingers danced over the communication console, monitoring all channels for any signs of distress or unexpected developments. As the ship's communications officer, he'd been training for first contact scenarios for years, but Linares 6 represented something unique, a human-like species that had already established peaceful relations with Earth's expanding Federation 3 years prior. Nervous, Lieutenant? Captain Eliza Voss appeared at his side, her weathered face set in her characteristic half-smile. Jack straightened his posture instinctively. Not nervous, Captain. Curious. That's what they all say, she chuckled, nodding toward the view screen. This is your first on-planet excursion with the natives, isn't it? Yes, ma'am. I've studied their language and customs extensively, but nothing beats the real thing, she finished for him. Remember the protocol. Observe, communicate, document. The Linarians may look remarkably human, but they're not. Cultural missteps could set back diplomatic relations by decades. Understood, Captain. She gave his shoulder a firm squeeze. You're one of our best, Monroe. Your fascination with xenoanthropology is precisely why I selected you for this mission. Just don't get too fascinated, understood? Jack nodded, unsure what she meant by the warning, but taking it seriously nonetheless. I'll represent Earth with dignity, ma'am. 12 hours later, Jack found himself questioning the entire concept of dignity as he stood in what appeared to be a living library. The Lunarian Welcoming Center was nothing like he had expected. Rather than a sterile, bureaucratic building, it was a gigantic, semi-transparent dome where every wall, shelf, and even furniture appeared to be alive, pulsing gently with bioluminescence that shifted colors, depending on the mood of the occupants. His guide, a Lunarian elder named the Lawn, had left him to acclimate to the energy of the knowledge nexus while he attended to some administrative matter. Jack wandered between rows of what looked like books, but were actually thin, living membranes that, when touched, transmitted information directly through skin contact. The technology, if one could call biologically evolved adaptations technology, was far beyond anything humans had developed. You're touching it wrong, came a melodic voice from behind him. Jack turned to find himself face to face with a young Lunarian woman. Like all her species, she had distinctly human features with subtle differences. Her skin had a faint bluish-silver undertone that seemed to shimmer under the ambient light. Her eyes were larger and more widely set with irises that resembled swirling galaxies, and her hair, a cascade of what looked like liquid silver, moved slightly as if underwater, despite the absence of any breeze. I'm sorry, Jack managed, suddenly very aware that he was representing all of humanity in this moment. The memory leaf, she pointed to the book-like organism in his hands. You're stimulating it into its defensive posture. It won't share knowledge if it thinks you're threatening it. Jack immediately loosened his grip, and the leaf book relaxed, its edges smoothing out. Thank you. I didn't realize they were sensitive to pressure. All living things are. Her smile made the bioluminescent walls around them pulse with a warm golden hue. I'm Zyra. You must be from the Earth vessel. Lieutenant Jack Monroe. He introduced himself with a small bow he had been told was the Lunarian equivalent of a handshake. Communications specialist with the Horizon Drift. Zyra's eyes widened with interest. A communications specialist? How fascinating. I'm a knowledge seeker in comparative xenology. Your species is of particular interest to me. Really? I would have thought humans would be quite dull compared to some of the other species you must have encountered. She moved closer, and Jack caught a scent like night-blooming flowers. On the contrary, humans are wonderfully contradictory creatures. Your biology suggests one evolutionary path, yet your behaviors often contradict it. Most fascinating of all are your mating rituals. Jack felt heat rise to his face. This wasn't covered in the cultural briefing. Our mating rituals? Yes. Zyra nodded enthusiastically, apparently unaware of his discomfort. Most species have straightforward reproductive practices dictated by biological imperatives. But humans, you've layered so many social constructs over your basic drives. Dinner dates, gift exchanges, the sharing of recreational intoxicants, elaborate courtship periods that may or may not result in reproduction. It's all so unnecessarily complex, and yet. She tilted her head, her galaxy eyes sparkling, rather beautiful in its inefficiency. Jack cleared his throat. Well, I suppose when you put it that way. Wait, she interrupted, sudden realization dawning on her face. Humans reproduce like that? Dinner, physical affection, courtship? Can I try to? The earnestness in her question caught Jack completely off guard. His diplomatic training hadn't prepared him for this particular line of inquiry from an alien scientist. That's not exactly how it. Oh, I'm being too forward, Zyra said quickly, the walls around them flushing a mild pink. Your species requires gradual escalation of intimacy. I apologize for the cultural misstep. No, it's not that, Jack stammered, trying to regain his professional composure. It's just that what you're describing is the social aspect of human coupling, not the actual reproductive process. Social aspect? Zyra looked genuinely puzzled. But isn't the purpose of all this elaborate ritual to select an optimal reproductive partner? Before Jack could formulate a response that wouldn't constitute an interplanetary incident, the Lawn returned, his elderly face creasing with pleasure at the sight of them. Ah, I see you've met my young colleague, he said warmly. Zyra is one of our most promising knowledge seekers. Her understanding of interspecies diplomacy is quite impressive. Jack managed a strained smile. Yes, we were just discussing cultural differences. Excellent, the Lawn beamed. Lieutenant Monroe, the Welcome Council is ready to receive you now. Zyra, perhaps you would do us the honor of continuing the lieutenant's orientation after the formal meeting? Your perspective would be valuable to our guest. I would be delighted, Zyra said, her silver hair rippling with what Jack was beginning to recognize as excitement. As he followed the Lawn toward the council chambers, Jack wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into. The captain's warning echoed in his mind. Don't get too fascinated. Too late for that, he thought as he glanced back at Zyra, who was already immersed in a memory leaf, presumably researching human courtship rituals. The council meeting proceeded with all the diplomatic formality Jack had expected. Trade agreements were reviewed, cultural exchange programs discussed, and scientific cooperation initiatives proposed. By the time it concluded, the two suns of Linares 6 were setting, bathing the knowledge nexus in crimson and gold light that made the living architecture pulse with warm colors. Your tour guide awaits, the Lawn said with a knowing smile as they exited the council chamber. Zyra stood at the entrance to the garden path, dressed now in what appeared to be formal attire. A flowing garment that seemed to be made of living material that shifted between deep blue and purple hues with her movements. I thought I might show you our Harmony Gardens, she said as Jack approached. They're particularly beautiful at twilight. Jack was acutely aware of the Lawn, watching them with amusement. That sounds wonderful, he replied, falling in a step beside her as they headed down a pathway lined with bioluminescent plants that lit up as they passed. They walked in silence for a few moments before Zyra spoke again. I've been researching your human courtship rituals, she said matter-of-factly. They're more complex than I initially understood. Jack felt his heart rate increase slightly. Zyra, I think there might be some confusion. No confusion, she assured him. I understand now that human reproductive behavior involves both social and biological components. The social aspects help determine compatibility, while the biological aspects are the actual reproduction. That's technically correct, Jack conceded cautiously. Zyra stopped walking and turned to face him directly. In the fading twilight, with the twin moons beginning to rise behind her, she looked otherworldly beautiful. I propose an experiment. An experiment? Jack repeated, suddenly wary. Yes, A cultural exchange of the most direct kind. I would like to experience the human courtship ritual, and you could observe Lunarian social bonding practices. For science, of course. For science, Jack echoed faintly, wondering if this constituted the exact sort of cultural complication Captain Voss had warned him about. Unless such an experiment would violate your mission parameters? Zyra asked, a hint of disappointment in her voice. Jack thought quickly. His mission was to learn about Lunarian culture and foster positive relations. This could technically fall under that mandate. Besides, she was talking about dating rituals, not actual reproduction. It would be purely educational. No violation, he said finally, but maybe we should establish some parameters for this experiment. Zyra's face lit up, literally, as the subtle bioluminescence in her skin brightened with her excitement. Excellent. I prepared a preliminary protocol based on my research. She handed him what looked like a small, gently pulsing leaf. This is a thought capture. It contains my suggested experimental design. Jack hesitantly took the leaf, and as his fingers made contact, information flowed directly into his mind. Not as intrusive as it sounded, but more like suddenly remembering something he'd forgotten. Zyra's experimental design was essentially a series of dates, each exploring a different facet of human courtship as she understood it. Shared meals, recreational activities, emotional disclosure sessions, and physical proximity tests that started with hand-holding and progressed to, well, Jack quickly handed the leaf back before he could remember the later stages. This is very thorough, he managed. I believe in comprehensive research, Zyra said proudly. Shall we begin with the first phase tomorrow? My research indicates that the evening meal is often the preferred starting point for human courtship evaluation. Put that way, it sounded so clinical that Jack almost laughed. Dinner would be fine, he agreed, deciding that one meal couldn't possibly lead to an interplanetary incident. He could use the opportunity to gently explain the difference between scientific observation and actual dating. Zyra's smile was so genuinely pleased that Jack felt a strange flutter in his chest. Until tomorrow, then, I'll arrange everything. As he watched her walk away, her silver hair catching the light of the rising moons, Jack had the distinct impression that he'd just agreed to something much more significant than dinner. Back on the Horizon Drift, Jack debated whether to mention his upcoming cultural experiment during his daily report. In the end, professional caution won out. Lieutenant Monroe reporting on day 1 of cultural exchange, he stated formally for the log. Initial meetings with the Lunarian Council proceeded as expected. I've been assigned a cultural guide for continued orientation. We'll report any significant developments. They're technically accurate while omitting details that might be misinterpreted. Besides, nothing had actually happened yet. The next evening found Jack standing outside a structure that appeared to be some kind of restaurant, though like everything on Linares 6, it was partially alive. The exterior walls undulated gently, and what looked like flowers opened and closed around glowing orbs that provided soft illumination. Zyra arrived precisely on time, wearing a different living garment that shifted between shades of green and blue. You look concerned, she observed immediately. Is this establishment not suitable? My research indicated humans prefer eating in specialized social spaces rather than private dwellings for initial courtship meetings. The restaurant is fine, Jack assured her quickly. I was just admiring the architecture. Zyra brightened. The nourishment harmony is over 200 cycles old. The founding plant consciousness integrated with mineral structures to create one of our most celebrated symbiotic buildings. Inside, the restaurant was even more remarkable. Tables grew organically from the floor, surrounded by what appeared to be living chairs that adjusted to perfectly fit the body of whoever sat in them. Bioluminescent organisms floated through the air, providing moving illumination that created an atmosphere both intimate and otherworldly. A Lunarian host guided them to a table near what Jack could only describe as a living fountain. A structure that pumped not water, but some kind of glowing nectar that changed colors as it flowed. This is beautiful, Jack said sincerely as they were seated. I'm pleased you approve, Zyra replied, then looked at him expectantly. Now, According to my research, this is when humans typically engage in small talk to determine basic compatibility. Jack couldn't help but smile at her earnest approach. That's generally how it works, yes, though usually with less explicit acknowledgement of the process. Ah, I see. Humans prefer to maintain the illusion that these interactions are spontaneous rather than biologically and socially determined. Fascinating. She paused, composing herself, then asked with carefully practiced casualness, "So, what activities do you enjoy when not performing your communication duties?" The forced nature of her question was so endearing that Jack found himself relaxing. "I enjoy studying different cultures, not just alien species, but the variety of human cultures as well. I play the piano, though I'm not particularly skilled, and I like hiking in natural environments." He took a sip of the beverage that had been placed before him. Luminescent blue liquid that tasted surprisingly like honeyed tea. "What about you? What does a knowledge seeker do when not seeking knowledge?" Zyra considered the question thoughtfully. "I communicate with the ancient memory corals in the deep oceans. I trace the patterns of our twin moons and how they affect the tides of consciousness." And sometimes her voice dropped slightly. "I simply watch the sky and wonder about the worlds beyond our own. I've been doing that since childhood." There was something in her admission, a vulnerability that went beyond her scientific persona, that touched Jack unexpectedly. "That doesn't sound so different from humans," he said softly. "We're all just trying to understand our place in the universe." Their food arrived, served on large leaves that changed shape to accommodate the different dishes. Jack was relieved to find that despite its alien appearance, Lunarian cuisine was not only edible for humans, but actually quite delicious. A symphony of flavors and textures unlike anything on Earth, yet somehow familiar. As they ate, their conversation flowed more naturally. Zyra asked about Earth, and Jack found himself describing oceans and mountains, cities and forests, the incredible diversity of his home planet. In turn, she told him about growing up on Lenara 6, about the seasonal consciousness shifts that affected all life on the planet, about her decision to specialize in xenology despite pressure to follow the more traditional path of communing with the planetary consciousness. "My father was disappointed," she admitted, tracing patterns in the condensation on her glass. "He believes our focus should be inward, not outward, that we risk diluting our cultural purity by engaging too much with other species." "Your father sounds traditional," Jack observed. "Is that common for your generation?" "No, but his position makes his views more significant than most," Zyra said, then added hesitantly, "He's the head of the Planetary Council." Jack nearly choked on his drink. "Your father is Counselor Varel? The same Counselor Varel who just signed a new trade agreement with our captain?" Zyra winced slightly. "I perhaps should have mentioned that earlier. Does it change your participation in our experiment?" Jack's mind raced through the potential diplomatic complications. The daughter of Lenaris VI's highest-ranking official was engaging in courtship experiments with a human lieutenant? Captain Voss would have his commission for this. "Jack," Zyra prompted when he remained silent too long. "Is this a problem?" Looking at her earnest expression, Jack made a decision that was definitely not in the diplomatic handbook. "No problem at all," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "To cultural exchange." Zyra's smile was like watching a star being born, radiant and somehow profound. She raised her glass to his. To cultural exchange. By the time their meal concluded, Jack had almost forgotten this was supposed to be an experiment rather than an actual date. Zyra's genuine curiosity about human ways was matched by her willingness to share insights about her own culture, creating an exchange that felt valuable on both sides. As they left the restaurant, stepping out into the silver light of the twin moons, Zyra turned to him. "My research indicates that successful initial encounters in human courtship often conclude with a small physical contact gesture. Is this accurate?" Jack felt his pulse quicken. "Sometimes, yes, but it's not a requirement. I should like to try the human custom," she said, her voice soft but determined. For completeness of the experiment. Before Jack could respond, she reached out and took his hand in hers. Her skin was warmer than he expected, with a texture like silk over velvet. A subtle current seemed to pass between them. Not electrical exactly, but a kind of resonance that made the hair on his arms stand up. "This is pleasant," Zyra observed, looking at their joined hands with scientific interest that didn't quite mask what looked suspiciously like personal pleasure. "Do humans always experience this kind of neural harmony when touching compatible individuals?" "Not always," Jack admitted, fighting the urge to pull her closer. "Sometimes it's just a hand." "Fascinating." She continued to hold his hand as they walked along the luminescent pathway leading back toward the city center. "Then the variations in physical response must be part of how humans determine potential mates. Very efficient, despite the seeming complexity of your courtship rituals." Jack decided it was time to clarify something. "Zyra, humans don't always engage in courtship rituals for reproduction. Sometimes it's just for companionship, or fun, or emotional connection." She looked at him with surprise. "You expend all that energy and don't even reproduce? What is the evolutionary advantage?" "Well," Jack considered how to explain, "humans believe there's value in connection for its own sake. Not everything we do is for biological imperatives." "Connection for its own sake," Zyra repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I think I understand. This is what we call soul resonance in our culture, the alignment of consciousnesses without practical purpose." She squeezed his hand gently. "Perhaps our species are not so different after all." As they reached the junction where their paths would separate, Jack to the human diplomatic quarters and Zyra to her home in the city's inner circle, she released his hand reluctantly. "I believe the first phase of our experiment was successful," she said formally, though her eyes sparkled with something far less scientific. "Would you be amenable to proceeding to Phase 2? "What exactly is Phase 2? Jack asked, both wary and intrigued. "Shared experience of natural beauty," Zyra replied promptly. "My research suggests humans bond through communal appreciation of aesthetically pleasing environments. I know an optimal location for such activity." Jack knew he should politely decline, report the situation to the captain, and request a different cultural liaison. Instead, he heard himself say, "I'd like that very much." Zyra's pleasure was evident in the subtle glow that emanated from her skin. "Tomorrow, then, I'll send coordinates to your communication device." As she walked away, her silver hair shining under the moonlight, Jack couldn't help but feel he was venturing into uncharted territory, and not just in the diplomatic sense. The next few days passed in a blur of what Jack could only honestly describe as dating, though he carefully labeled each outing as cultural research in his official reports. Zyra showed him the hidden wonders of Linares 6, bioluminescent tide pools that responded to thought patterns, floating gardens that drifted through the lower atmosphere gathering energy from the twin suns, ancient memory trees that hummed with the collective experiences of generations. For her part, Zyra seemed just as fascinated by Jack's descriptions of Earth customs as he was by her world. She asked endless questions about everything from human music to sports to family structures, absorbing his answers with an enthusiasm that made even the most mundane aspects of Earth life seem remarkable. On their fourth experiment, Zyra took him to a remote beach where the sand sparkled like diamonds under the light of the setting suns. They sat side by side, watching as the twin moons rose over the iridescent waters. "I have something for you," Zyra said suddenly, reaching into a small pouch at her waist. "My research indicates that gift-giving is an important component of human courtship rituals." She pressed something into his palm, a small stone that seemed to contain an entire universe of swirling lights within it. As he held it, the lights pulsed in perfect rhythm with his heartbeat. "This is a soul stone," Zyra explained. "It responds to the unique energy pattern of whoever holds it. On Linares, we exchange them as symbols of connection." Jack stared at the stone, mesmerized by the way it seemed to understand something fundamental about him that he couldn't articulate himself. "It's beautiful," he said softly, then looked up at her. "But I don't have anything to give you in return." Zyra's smile was gentle. "That's not necessary. I simply wanted you to have a piece of Linares to take with you when you leave." The reminder that his time on the planet was limited, that the horizon drift would eventually continue its mission, struck Jack with unexpected force. He'd been so caught up in their cultural exchange that he'd forgotten its temporary nature. "Thank you," he said, closing his fingers around the stone. "I'll treasure it." Something in his tone made Zyra look at him more closely. "You seem troubled." "Not troubled," Jack said, choosing his words carefully. "Just aware that our time for experimentation is finite." "All experiences are finite," Zyra observed philosophically. "That doesn't diminish their value." Jack smiled despite himself. "That sounds remarkably human." "Perhaps," she conceded, "or perhaps humans sound remarkably Lunarian." She hesitated, then added softly, "My research has led me to another human courtship custom I would like to explore, if you are willing." The scientific phrasing couldn't mask the vulnerability in her request. "What custom?" Instead of answering, Zyra moved closer until their faces were inches apart. Her eyes, those swirling galaxies of blue and silver, gazed into his with unmistakable intent. "I believe humans call it a kiss," she whispered. Jack knew he should stop this. He was a representative of Earth, not some interstellar Romeo. But as Zyra leaned in, all thoughts of protocol evaporated. Their lips met, and the world around them seemed to fade into insignificance. The kiss was both alien and familiar, her lips warmer and subtly textured differently from humans, but the connection it created was universal. When they finally pulled apart, Jack was breathless, and Zyra's skin was glowing with bioluminescence that pulsed in rhythm with both their heartbeats. "That was—" she began, seemingly at a loss for her usual scientific analysis. "Yeah," Jack agreed, equally unable to form a coherent thought. They might have stayed in that moment longer if not for a sudden commotion from the tree line behind them. Voices raised in alarm broke the spell, and Jack turned to see a group of Lunarians approaching rapidly. Zyra stood quickly, positioning herself slightly in front of Jack in what he recognized as a protective stance. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" she demanded, her voice carrying an authority he hadn't heard before. The leader of the group, a tall Lunarian male with stern features, stepped forward. "Zyra, daughter of Varel, you dishonor your lineage and your planet with this aberration." Jack rose to stand beside her, recognizing the situation was rapidly deteriorating. "Sir, there's been no impropriety." "Silence, human," the Lunarian snapped. "This is not your world, and she's not your kind." "Magistrate Krell," Zyra addressed the man with cold formality, "you overstep your authority. My activities are sanctioned research." "Research?" Krell's laugh was bitter. "Is that what you call it? The Council has been patient with your xenophilic tendencies, but this crosses all boundaries of propriety. Your father will be most disappointed." Jack felt a surge of protective anger. "With all due respect, Magistrate, Zyra is conducting legitimate cultural exchange as approved by both our governments." "And does this cultural exchange typically involve intimate physical contact on your world, Lieutenant?" Krell asked sarcastically. "Perhaps we should inform your captain of your unorthodox research methods." Before Jack could respond, two more Lunarians moved forward to flank Krell. "The Purity Council has voted," one of them announced. "Both of you will come before the full Planetary Council to answer for this violation of natural order." "The Purity Council has no authority over diplomatic personnel," Zyra objected, but her voice betrayed uncertainty. "In matters of planetary security, we have every authority," Krell countered. "Now, you can come willingly, or we can make this significantly more unpleasant." Jack assessed their options quickly. He and Zyra were outnumbered, and while he doubted the Lunarians would physically harm them, resisting would only escalate the situation. Besides, if there was going to be a diplomatic incident, better to face it head-on than try to escape. "We'll go with you," he said calmly, taking Zyra's hand. "But I want it on record that we've done nothing wrong." Krell's expression was cold. "That will be for the Council to decide." They were escorted back to the city in uncomfortable silence. Jack noticed the looks they received from passing Lunarians, some disapproving, others curious, and a few that seemed almost supportive. Clearly, opinion on human-Lunarian relations was divided among the population. As they approached the Grand Council chamber, a massive, living structure that resembled a cross between a cathedral and a giant flower, Jack felt Zyra tense beside him. "My father will be there," she whispered. "This is going to be difficult." Jack squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Just tell the truth. We've done nothing to be ashamed of." "It's not shame I'm worried about," Zyra replied. "It's consequences. For both of us." Before Jack could ask what she meant, the massive doors of the council chamber opened, revealing a semicircular room where dozens of Lunarian officials sat in tiered seats that appeared to grow directly from the living floor. At the center of the highest tier sat an older Lunarian male who bore a striking resemblance to Zyra. Same silvery hair. Though his was shorter, same distinctive facial structure, but with eyes that held more steel than starlight. Counselor Varel's expression revealed nothing as his daughter and the human lieutenant were led to the center of the chamber floor. Jack noticed Captain Voss was already present, standing to one side with a thunderous expression that did not bode well for his future career prospects. Magistrate Krell. Varel's voice was deep and resonant, filling the chamber without apparent effort. "You have called this emergency session. State your purpose." Krell stepped forward, his posture rigid with righteous indignation. "Honored counselors, I bring before you evidence of a disturbing development. Your daughter, knowledge seeker Zyra, has been engaging in inappropriate relations with this human officer, Lieutenant Jack Monroe. They were discovered in a remote location, engaging in physical intimacy of the most concerning nature." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Varel's expression remained impassive, but his eyes flicked briefly to his daughter with what Jack thought might be disappointment. "These are serious accusations," Varel said evenly. "Knowledge seeker Zyra, what do you respond?" Zyra stepped forward, her head held high despite the tension visible in her shoulders. "Father, honored counselor, the accusations are factually correct but contextually misleading. Lieutenant Monroe and I have been conducting an approved cultural exchange, studying comparative social bonding rituals. By kissing, someone called out, causing another wave of murmurs. "Yes," Zyra replied, unashamed. "Physical expressions of affection are a central component of human social bonding. How can we claim to understand their species if we refuse to comprehend this fundamental aspect of their culture?" Krell scoffed loudly. "So, this was all in the name of science? You expect us to believe that? Whether you believe it is irrelevant to its truth," Zyra countered. "My research methods are sound, even if they challenge your xenophobic sensibilities." "Enough," Varel interrupted before Krell could respond. "Captain Voss, as the ranking human representative, what is your position on this situation?" All eyes turned to the captain, who stepped forward with military precision. "Counselor Varel, the actions of Lieutenant Monroe were not authorized as part of our diplomatic mission. While cultural exchange is encouraged, intimate physical contact crosses the line into inappropriate fraternization. Lieutenant Monroe will be disciplined according to Earth Alliance protocols." Jack felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Not only was he in trouble with the Lunarians, but his own captain was throwing him under the proverbial bus. "If I may speak, Counselor," Jack requested, stepping forward despite Captain Voss's warning glare. Varel considered him for a moment, then nodded. "The human may address the council." Jack took a deep breath, knowing his next words could either salvage or destroy his career, and possibly much more. "Honored counselors, I take full responsibility for any breach of protocol." Knowledge seeker Zyra approached our interactions from a position of scientific inquiry, while he hesitated, then decided truth was his only viable option. "I allowed my personal feelings to influence my judgment." "Personal feelings?" Varel repeated, his tone unreadable. "Yes, counselor. During our cultural exchanges, I developed genuine respect and affection for your daughter. What began as an educational exercise evolved into something more meaningful, at least for me. If anyone should be held accountable for crossing boundaries, it should be me, not Zyra." The chamber erupted in shocked conversations. Captain Voss looked like she might personally escort Jack out the nearest airlock, while Krell wore an expression of vindicated outrage. Jack couldn't bring himself to look at Zyra. Silence. Varel's voice thundered through the chamber, instantly quelling the noise. This situation is unprecedented and requires careful consideration. The council will confer in private. All parties will remain here. As the counselors rose to withdraw to their deliberation chamber, Jack finally risked a glance at Zyra. To his surprise, she was looking at him not with anger or embarrassment, but with an expression of wonder. "Why did you do that?" she whispered when the last counselor had left. "You didn't need to take the blame." "It wasn't about blame," Jack replied quietly. "It was about truth." "Then I should have spoken my truth as well," Zyra said with sudden determination. She turned abruptly to Captain Voss. "Captain, before the council returns, you should know that Lieutenant Monroe's characterization was incomplete. The personal feelings he described were not one-sided." Captain Voss regarded her with a mixture of surprise and resignation. "I suspected as much," she sighed. "Lieutenant, when we return to the ship, we're going to have a very long conversation about the meaning of observe, communicate, document." "Yes, ma'am," Jack acknowledged, though his attention remained focused on Zyra. "You didn't have to say that." "I told you before," she said softly. "On Linares, we value soul resonance, connection for its own sake. I would be dishonoring that principle if I let you stand alone." Before Jack could respond, the council doors reopened, and the Lunarian officials filed back in. Their expressions gave nothing away as they resumed their seats. Varel, the last to enter, stood at the center of the highest tier. After careful deliberation, he announced, "The council has reached a decision regarding this incident." Jack braced himself for the worst: censure, expulsion from the planet, possibly even diplomatic sanctions against Earth. "Lieutenant Jack Monroe," Varel continued, his gaze fixed on Jack, "you have admitted to developing personal attachment to a Lunarian citizen during what was supposed to be an official cultural exchange. This represents a breach of protocol that cannot be overlooked." Jack nodded, accepting the judgment. However, Varel's tone shifted subtly. "The council also recognizes that interspecies relationships, while rare, are not without precedent in the broader galactic community. Our isolation has perhaps made us unduly cautious about such matters." Krell stood abruptly. "Counselor, you cannot possibly be suggesting we condone this." "I am suggesting, Magistrate," Varel cut him off with an edge of steel, "that our people have survived and thrived precisely because we adapt rather than calcify. Your Purity Council serves an important purpose in preserving our heritage, but must not become an obstacle to our evolution." Turning back to Jack and Zyra, Varel continued, "Knowledge seeker Zyra, your methods were unorthodox, but, upon reflection, not without merit. The Council proposes the establishment of a formal cultural integration program, under which interspecies social bonding can be studied in a structured, supervised context." Jack could hardly believe what he was hearing. Instead of punishment, Varel was institutionalizing what he and Zyra had started. "Lieutenant Monroe," Varel addressed him directly, "subject to approval from your superiors, the Council would consider you a valuable contributor to this program, should you wish to extend your stay on Linares 6. Jack looked at Captain Voss, who appeared as surprised as he felt. After a moment, she gave him a small, resigned nod. "The Earth Alliance is always interested in deepening cultural ties with our allies," she said formally, though her expression clearly added, "We'll discuss the details later." "Then it is settled," Varel declared. "This session is concluded." As the council members began to disperse, many still murmuring among themselves, Zyra turned to Jack with barely contained excitement. "Do you understand what just happened? My father not only accepted our experiment, he's institutionalizing it." "I'm still processing," Jack admitted, glancing toward Varel, who was now approaching them with measured steps. "But I think I just got reassigned to the most unusual diplomatic post in Earth Alliance history." Counselor Varel stopped before them, his expression stern but not unkind. "Lieutenant Monroe," he acknowledged with a small bow, then turned to his daughter. "Zyra, When I encouraged you to pursue xenology, this is not precisely what I had in mind. Yet you supported me, she observed, studying her father curiously. Why? A hint of a smile touched Varel's lips. Perhaps because many years ago, before I became head counselor, I spent a season studying the crystal singers of Altair Prime and found their ways enlightening. He looked between them meaningfully. The universe is vast, and wisdom comes in many forms. Sometimes the most valuable lessons are learned through connection rather than observation. With that cryptic statement, he bowed again and departed, leaving Jack and Zyra staring after him in stunned silence. I think, Jack said slowly, your father just gave us his blessing, in a very political, roundabout way. So it would seem, Zyra agreed, a smile spreading across her face. Cultural Integration Program Lead is a significant promotion from Knowledge Seeker. Jack laughed, feeling weeks of tension dissolve. And what exactly does this program entail, do you think? Well, Zyra stepped closer, taking his hand with newfound confidence. I believe further experimentation is required. For science, of course. Of course, Jack agreed solemnly, though he couldn't suppress his smile. We should probably be very thorough in our research. Absolutely, Zyra nodded earnestly. Human courtship rituals are complex and nuanced. It could take years to fully document them. Years, huh? Jack felt his heart expand with possibilities he'd never considered before this mission. I suppose if it's for the advancement of interspecies understanding. Zyra's eyes sparkled with mischief and something deeper, something that transcended the differences between their species. Actually, I believe we've only scratched the surface of the first phase. We should probably start again from the beginning, don't you think? For the sake of scientific rigor. As the twin moons of Linares 6 rose higher in the night sky, casting their silver light over the living city, Jack pulled Zyra closer. I think that's an excellent suggestion, Knowledge Seeker. Their lips met in a kiss that was no longer an experiment, but a promise. Not just between two individuals, but between two worlds finding new ways to understand each other. When they finally parted, Zyra looked up at him with a teasing smile. So, about that second human ritual you mentioned. Jack's laughter echoed through the now empty council chamber, a sound of pure joy that made the living walls pulse with harmonious light. Whatever came next, whether challenges from traditional factions, bureaucratic complications, or the simple day-to-day navigation of an interspecies relationship, they would face it together, pioneers in the most fundamental form of cultural exchange. And somewhere in the cosmos, Jack was certain the universe was smiling at the endless, beautiful improbability of it all.